You're listening to Autism Outreach Podcast, a podcast full of ready-to-use strategies to help those with autism strengthen their communication skills. Here's your host, Rose Griffin of ABA Speech, a speech therapist and board-certified behavior analyst who shares tips you can use in your next therapy session.
Welcome to Communication Without Limits, an introduction to AAC for BCBAs. I will be your presenter today. If you're new to me, my name is Rose Griffin. I'm a speech language pathologist and a board certified behavior analyst. There are less than 515 of us in the entire world, and I am the founder of ABA Speech. I worked for 20 years in the public schools and non-public programs for autistic learners and started my own company, ABA Speech, 6 years ago with creating the Action Builder cards and Double Up therapy products. We are an ACE and ASHA provider, and I also have a weekly podcast called Autism Outreach. Make sure that you listen. Every single Tuesday, a new episode airs, and AAC is something that we talk about a lot. I'm excited to share with you today this free training. I get a lot of emails and messages from BCBAs all about AAC. And so I wanted to set up this series of tutorials, with the first one being dedicated to AAC, all about giving you an introduction to the topic so that you're feeling more comfortable. Everybody has a different comfort level, both speech therapists and BCBAs, with AAC and how to best support our students who are candidates for using this as a way to communicate with the world. I want to start today with a story about a client that I worked with many moons ago. When I was working at the Cleveland Clinic, I'll never forget working with a 5-year-old student. Let's call him Vance for today. He was the kind of student who knew exactly what he wanted to do in the world, but he had absolutely no way to tell people, and instead used unsafe problem behavior to navigate his environment. He would either leave the teaching area, not engage in the activity, or use unsafe problem behavior that was really a barrier to him accessing the community, school, and learning. I remember studying his paperwork before our first session and seeing all of the therapy notes from the time that he had started his early intervention services when he was very, very young and had delayed speech. I remember reading through it and telling my coworker, Jamie, how can this be? What did he do in all of those sessions? How could they not reach him? He had been in some type of therapy since the age of 2. And so he had been receiving specialized services since the age of 2. So for 3 years of specialized services, he still could not communicate with the world. So what I did first is I observed him at first, and I wanted to just see how he was currently using his language. And he really wasn't. He didn't have an AAC device. He wasn't using any pictures proficiently. And I looked to see what he really loved and enjoyed. When I was in the classroom doing my first session, he really tended to enjoy things where he was up and moving. So when I saw him for his first therapy session, we used bubbles. He was 5. He really enjoyed being up and moving about, which is great for students, all students really, and us as well. I like to move about as well. I used bubbles during our session. And because Vance did not have a way to communicate with the world, I really wanted to utilize an AAC device to see if that would be something that would be helpful for him. And working where I did at the Cleveland Clinic, we did have access to dedicated devices. This was 20 years ago. So iPads didn't exist. So it was a little different. Now a lot of people have iPads with dedicated apps. These were dedicated AAC devices, which you can still find some people using these. They actually are very nice. He had a dedicated device, and I set it up before the session with some of his things that he loved and enjoyed. So we did bubbles. I really thought this would be a great way to work on requesting, joint attention, all those early learner skills. So I would blow some bubbles and we popped them together. I blew the bubbles. I gesturally prompted 2 bubbles on the device so he could see where it was located. And after our 3rd try, where I gesturally pointed and then he did it after me, we blow the bubbles. The bubbles were popped. He wanted more bubbles. He looked at that button on his device and he independently touched bubbles. It was amazing. For the very first time in his 5 years of life, Vance was able to communicate on his own with an AAC device. So we started blowing all kinds of bubbles that day, and we started blowing really, really big bubbles, and he loved it. He used his device to request bubbles all on his own, and he started to understand that his communication was powerful. It was amazing. He touched that button, he said bubbles, and it was amazing to take him back to his classroom. I did see him in the therapy office and tell his teacher, oh my goodness, Vance said bubbles all on his own with his device. And you could tell that he was proud of it too. I phoned home, let his mom know. It was a close-knit community of clients that I was working with at that time at the clinic. And it was very, very exciting. But in that moment, I saw Vance understand that his communication was powerful. And we were able to do that through using AAC. And I want you to feel that way for all of your students too. It did fill me with a lot of joy on that day to be able to see Vance's first time communicating on his own. But as a speech therapist, BCBA, and mom of 3 kids, it really did hurt my heart that we had to wait 5 years. That is a long time in order for him to be able to communicate on his own. And it really just transformed our therapy sessions. It transformed his entire life. And he was on a trajectory of growth to be able to communicate not only for requesting, but for going beyond basic communication as well. But it all started that day in that therapy session with requesting on his device for bubbles. So over the next 15 to 20 minutes or so, I'm going to share with you an introduction to AAC so that you too can support your students and help them communicate, maybe for the first time. AAC, augmentative and alternative communication. A lot of the times in the field, we call it AAC. That is usually what it is used when we are discussing it. And it really helps not only autistic students, but all students express their thoughts and needs across the day. It includes systems like sign language, picture boards, electronic devices, and it really fosters communication, language development, and social reciprocity as well. The benefits of AAC are very vast. It can provide a way for autistic students to communicate, which is amazing. It can reduce frustration and challenging behaviors, which we don't want any of our students to ever feel that way, but we know that they do. It can also increase social interactions and academic participation. I also wanted to tell you, I forgot to mention at the beginning, but I am going to include a handout with my slides as well as my slide deck. So if you are a supervising BCBA and you're working with RBTs and you want to provide training, or you want to share this as part of your parent training as well, that you will be able to do that. I just ask that you give ABA Speech credit for these slides and notes. One thing I wanted to discuss that not a lot of even speech language pathologists may know about is the Communication Bill of Rights. I'm going to show you exactly what it looks like on the next page. The Communication Bill of Rights is just that. It is a Bill of Rights for all students who are using AAC. And it really says this is our students' or individuals' rights. The right to request desired objects, people, the right to refuse or reject things that are undesired, the right to make choices, the right to make comments. This is something that we really need to be cognizant of, because I have done a lot of administrative and consulting work, and I have seen people take away a student's device. We never want to take anything away from a learner unless it's unsafe, but especially an AAC device, because this is the student's voice. And we as BCBAs need to model this for all people that we come in contact, whether it's going into the classroom and we're working with teachers and paraprofessionals, whether it's supporting RBTs who are providing service on the front line of our plans. We have to be very serious about this is the student's communication device. If they keep pressing a button over and over and over again, we're not taking that button off. If a student is no longer in their classroom, we're not deleting that picture from their device. They might want to still talk about that student. I bring up those very specific examples because those are things that other BCBAs have asked me to do as the person who was the holder of wisdom on how to program an AAC device. We need to be very mindful and very respectful of our students' communication. And we don't want to make people feel bad if they request things like that. Can we take this button off? He can't have that anymore. Can we take off car wash because during the day he can't go? We need to think about our programming and the environment, but we should not be deleting buttons because it's something that our students want to talk about. So the Communication Bill of Rights, you can, because of copywriting purposes, I can't include that document for you here, but you can Google it and you can share it with staff and parents as well. It's a very, very nice resource, and I'm excited to share about it today. The other thing that I want to urge you to think about is that augmentative communication is a collaborative team process. Let's say that you're a BCBA at a clinic and you don't have a speech therapist on staff. Okay, I would see if you could collaborate with either the existing speech therapist that's on a team or consult with a speech language pathologist who has an area of expertise in AAC. And that's something that I do for ABA clinics, where I do case reviews of clients who are emergent communicators who are having difficulty finding a way to communicate, and then helping to guide them on how can we get started with AAC. What we don't want to happen is we don't want the parent in the middle of recommendations. Maybe the BCBA feels comfortable with PECs. And I love PECs. I do a lot of collaborative things with PECs. I like Lori Frost and Andy Bondi. They're great. And wow, have they helped so many students. But let's hypothetically say that a BCBA doesn't know much about dynamic devices. And they say, you know what? I think we should use PECs, because maybe they really believe that's going to help the student find their voice. And that's great. And we know that can be a great place to start. Let's say the speech therapist has been trained extensively in AAC and doesn't want to start with PECs. What we don't want to do is put the parent in the middle of that situation. And it does take a little bit of planning and time. But if we could even just have an email discussion or a phone call or a quick Zoom to talk about how we are going to support our students' communication. We have to come to some type of collaborative discussion about what we're going to work on and what we're going to introduce to our student for communication. We never want to put a parent in the middle of a situation where they're having to side with the BCBA or the SLP. We don't have to have groupthink. We don't have to say, okay, that's it. We're going to do PECs. I'm not going to do AAC. Okay, that's it. We're going to do AAC. We're not going to do PECs. We don't have to have those types of definitive discussions because that's probably not what's best for the client. We just need to be cognizant of, well, what targets are we going to work on? What are we going to introduce? And can we come back and discuss how the student's doing with that? And just think about that. More collaborative, not putting the parent in the middle of that discussion. So there are various types of AAC. So there are going to be pictures. There are going to be PECs if you're following that protocol. There are going to be low-tech and high-tech options as well. So you might be using PECs. You might be using pictures. This is really similar to something that I used in the clinic, where we have the strip at the bottom, the student finds it and puts it down there. If you're following the PECs protocol, there's different protocols that you can follow there as well. So pictures. Oftentimes, people may be using a picture board. I just want you to see these things. This one was actually for sale on Etsy. Some educators sell those types of things, but you can always make these yourself as well. This is a static device where it does have a voice. And for the Go Talks, we used to record our own voices on these. These are still for sale, and they can be nice for students who are getting started with communication. They actually used to have a Go Talk too that just had 4 buttons based on your learner's needs. And then we have high-tech devices. And there's going to be different softwares for these. You may be using an app from Frankie Romick, LAMP vocabulary. Might be using Proloquo to go. There's many, many, many. Cough Drop. And something I want to say about that too, and something that I did in the non-public program that I worked in, is I called, usually these software companies do have a sales rep that is usually a clinician, usually a speech language pathologist, and they may cover one state, they may cover a couple. But a big part of their job is coming out to your place of work, showing the staff the different devices that they have. Sometimes they can give you loaner devices. They can say, well, you know what? If you want to try this with some of your students, you can borrow this. Obviously, you have to sign some paperwork and things like that. But this is really nice so that you can try different things with your students. And if you're working in a very large district, if you're a school-based BCBA, in your county, you may have a representative. If your district is very large, you may have an AAC team, and they would have these things readily available. If you're working in a very large district, you may actually have a warehouse that has some of these different devices inventoried for you to try. If you're working in a district like I did, we had iPads and we had different apps that were purchased by the technology department using grant funds. And so we were able to try some different things. In the district that I worked in, we had a county representative over Cuyahoga County, and that person would come out, look at our student, work with our student, talk to me, talk to the teacher, the team, parents, students, if applicable, and would try different apps or devices with the student. If you don't have access to those things, that's okay too. But I just want to give you that scope and sequence of who may be able to help you. So if you've determined that your student is going to use an AAC device, how do we get started with that? We have to talk about what materials or devices are most appropriate. And so feature matching is assessing an individual's needs and areas of strength and matching them with an ideal access method, language system, and device. And really the goal of an AAC assessment is to determine the system that will optimize communication for your user. AAC assessment is, just like all therapy, is an ongoing process. An ongoing evaluation, decision-making are required even after the system has been selected. SLPs also collaborate and engage with family members and caregivers during the assessment. So we talked about that idea of team. Can you, as the BCBA, talk with the SLP? If you have an SLP on staff, awesome. If you're able to consult, great. It's very important for us to have this cohesive, collaborative team. And if we don't have that family involvement piece, AAC, the whole process, the assessment, the implementation may really be hindered. So we really have to think to ourselves, can we get the family involved on any level that will be beneficial for the student then using the device as well? I have sat in many meetings where the parents say, oh, he doesn't use that. she doesn't use that at home. And you're just like, oh, come on. It's their voice. But we just really have to talk with parents there. I did want to bring up the idea of abandonment. So there is this idea of abandonment of an AA system. And what it means is that the client or student has stopped using the device, even though they really still need one. There is a study by Zangari and Kangas, and it says that abandonment occurs in approximately 1/3 of cases, even if the system is well designed and functional. So we really do have to be cognizant of that. But if we're providing parent training as BCBAs, we can talk with parents about that, and we may have a better chance at that ongoing communication. We want to talk about what would be included in a comprehensive AAC assessment, just so you have an idea. And this information comes from ASHA.org, which is our National Speech Therapy Organization. So we want to take a case history, looking at the student's learner history. What are they currently using to communicate? Have they tried AAC in the past? Are they motivated to use AAC? And what does that look like exactly? We also want to take an inventory and say, well, what are their current communication skills and needs? And we probably have this information from our intake. And what does that look like in relation to the environment? Do they struggle in certain environments, and in other environments they're not having as hard of a time? If our students able to share with us, we obviously want them to self-report as well. This may not be applicable for everybody, but I did want to include this. And looking at their communication success, what is that impact on the individual? What barriers do they have? And what are their goals and preferences for communication? Because you could have a student where you introduce pictures and you introduce an AAC device, and maybe they are verbalizing some as well, but maybe they do have a preference. Maybe they do prefer pictures, or maybe they do prefer an AAC device. And then we want to look at sensory and motor status. And this is a great thing to think about. And we haven't even discussed occupational therapists, because in my mind, I'm talking to BCBAs that work in a clinic, and you may not have access to an occupational therapist. Now, where I worked in a non-public program not at the clinic, we didn't have an OT at the clinic, but where I worked at a non-public program here in my hometown, we had occupational therapists on staff. And so it was nice for us as BCBAs and SLPs and OTs to be able to collaborate on potentially sensory needs, potentially motor. I've talked in previous trainings where I had a student who could not point, so they pointed like this. So I had to work with the OT so that the student could shape up a point to be able to activate cells on the device. And so that's really going to come into play when a student, can they access the AAC system? And if you have a student who has any other motoric difficulties as well, or support needs in that area, that is really a great time to talk with the occupational therapist. And or if you have a physical therapist, sometimes that is also warranted as well. And just helping us to make sure that our student is regulated, ready to learn, is ready to communicate. So I want to talk about 3 different areas that we have to think about when we're thinking about AAC. So how the individual can best access the AAC device. How will they access that AAC device? That's important. That's where we may need to draw on our ability to understand the student, potentially OT, PT, speech. If we're thinking gold standard collaborative, if you're thinking, Rose, I don't have any of those people in my clinic, that's okay. Just want to give us the broad picture here. What language system is going to be appropriate? There are different language systems. So Proloquo uses a different vocabulary than LAMP does. It's very, very different. And what is going to be easiest for our student? What materials or devices are most appropriate? So this goes back to that idea of feature matching. And so what are my clients' needs? What are their strengths? And what device or access method is going to be best for them to access the language system and the entire device for your student? This is something that I discussed when I talked at the OHABA conference. Dr. Heward was in my talk, and that gave me heart palpitations. But I loved this slide, and I think it's something to think about in this collaborative focus is, who does this device belong to? Does this device belong to the BCBA? No, it does not. Does this device belong to the speech language pathologist? It doesn't. Who does this device belong to? It belongs to the student. And so we really have to remember that. We have to be really professional and empathetic and considerate when we think about the recommendation of using an AAC device as part of our intervention plan, which can absolutely help our students know that their communication is powerful, maybe for the first time. We need to have that dialogue if there's a team involved. If you're a private BCBA at a clinic and the student is in school and getting school-based services, we should have a form filled out so that we can talk with the school-based team to see, hey, are you using AAC? How's that going? Can we talk about that? And we never want to get the parent in the middle of that, because even if we don't agree on everything, which we don't have to, we want to be working together to help our client maximize their outcomes, which is a fancy way for saying we want everybody to be able to spontaneously communicate. So do you remember Vance, my client that I talked about at the beginning of our time here together today? I don't want your clients to have to wait until they are 5 or 6 or 7 or 18 to have a way to communicate with the world. I know that if we're in person together, that this is a room full of BCBAs who want to make a difference in autistic children's lives by helping them communicate. Do I think it's easy? No, I do not. Do I think that you can help your clients get started with AAC so that every one of your autistic students can find their voice? Absolutely. I know that you can and that you will in your next session. Thank you so much for attending the first of what I hope to be a many series of freebie talks that will help you as a BCBA feel more comfortable with communication-based topics. And for this, I'm going to include my slide deck. If you would like to utilize this training, I'm also going to include my handouts as well. If you want to learn more, I urge you to join my CEU membership called the ABA Speech Connection. Every single month, you get a new ACE CEU. You can take it live or as a self-paced course in our CEU library. You also get to connect with like-minded professionals, and once a month, you can meet with me to ask questions about these topics and so much more. I hope that you will tune into the Autism Outreach Podcast. A new episode comes out every single Tuesday, all about autism and communication. And make sure to follow me over on Instagram, where I share and disseminate information every single day about using applied behavior analysis to help your autistic students start communicating today.
Thanks for listening to Autism Outreach. If you enjoyed the show today, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode full of actionable strategies you can use in your therapy room. Write a review too. That would mean so much to me. I always love hearing from you. Have a specific topic that you want included on a future show? Reach out over on Instagram, ABA Speech by Rose, or visit me at www.abaspeech.org.